This is Mount Douglas, or Mount Doug as the locals here call it. It also goes by its First Nations name, Pikul. I see it from my house as it's just a 5-minute walk away. Mount Doug is 225 meters or 738 feet high and is a mound of rock from when a glacier came through here many years ago. And there is a tall communications tower at the top. Since I have this mountain on my N-scale model railroad, I decided to convert it into a representation of Mount Doug. I will be adding trees and the iconic communications tower to this scene. I first scaled some photos I found of the tower to half N scale to force some perspective and make the mountain look taller than it really is and the tower look further away. I cut the main mast to length from a piece of translucent plastic tube, as I'll be adding the iconic red light to the top. I decided to print the base for the mast on my FDM printer. I included a hole for the mast, but it was a bit of a snug fit, so I drilled that out a bit. Off camera, I had wired up a very small red LED with wires through the mast. Looks good with the base. The mast has these fins on the bottom for better stability, so I cut those out of styrene and attached them. I also added a styrene rod that acts as a cover for some cabling, at least that's what I think it's for. Because of the dissimilar plastics, I used CA glue. At this point, I decided to tape the mast to the photo to keep it more stable. I then started adding on lots of tiny details. In case you're wondering, these very thin plastic rods are actually 3D printer filament placed that comes out of my extruder when I change filament, as it's thinner than any styrene rod I had. And then some round dishes which I created with my hole punch. They always get stuck in the barrel, so I have to poke them out with a paper clip. Some rectangular antennas. Then there are these crossbars that hold more antennas. My C8 activator spray came in handy for these tiny details. Some of the antennas were too long, so I just trimmed them with my nippers. The longer cross arms at the top were a bit more fiddly because they are so thin in half end scale. I had some problems with the whole assembly, so I took it off the mast and did some tweaking. In hindsight, I should have done it as a separate assembly from the start and then just glued it on. Coming together well. Off camera, I glued on the red LED to the top of the mast. In order to not get any paint on the lens, I cut out a very tiny square of Tamiya tape to cover it. Now onto some painting to unify all the various plastics I used. So, to the garage to spray on several coats of off-white with my airbrush. I found this old plastic cup, which was the perfect stand to let it dry between coats. Once dry, I took it back to my modeling workbench to paint the base a concrete color. The first color I used was too brown, so I switched over to a medium gray. I also added a few other dots of gray here and there. I carefully removed the small circle of masking tape covering the LED. I know it can be a bit controversial, but I decided to add in some of the graffiti on the base. I used my collection of gel pens. It's an extremely tiny detail that likely won't be noticed with it being far away from any viewers, but I think, like all things modeling, if a detail is not there, it will somehow be missed. I toned down the graffiti a bit with an application of pan pastels. top of the mountain usually is quite dry and dusty around the communications tower. Now that the tower is finished, let's install it. I picked a drill bit that was thick enough for the wires and drilled a hole at the top of my mountain in the plaster cloth that I used to create it. I vacuumed up the plaster dust and then tried a test fit. It looks good and the LED works, but it's not properly embedded in the ground. I trimmed a bit of the plaster off with my hobby knife. That's better. Of course, I had more cleaning to do. And there we go. It's looking good. You might notice something else off to the right. I'll cover that in my next video when I make my own pine trees and plant up the mountain. Thanks for watching.